We're going to talk about concealment of assets along with money laundering, which is part of helping to conceal assets, although we already know a lot about money laundering. So, bust outs are unique to bankruptcies, right? You can intentionally buy assets, get a lot of liabilities, and then intentionally declare bankruptcy. That's not a thing that happens in divorce, but they both have estates, and people are gonna have to give assets either over to a creditor or over to the ex-spouse. So that's what's happening here. In a Chapter 7, everything's going to get liquidated. In a Chapter 11 or Chapter 13, some things the debtor is going to get to keep. Like they may get to keep their car and continue making payments, but maybe at a lower rate or something. In a divorce, things are just going to get split up between the two people. So in the bankruptcy code, concealment is a crime. So when you declare bankruptcy, you make a list of all your assets and you turn it over to the bankruptcy court. So if you left something off, that would be a crime. Intentionally left something off, that would be a crime. And what they can do is they can just say, well, then you don't get to be bankrupt. They used to have to pay it back. Or the court can say, oh, now we've discovered this asset. Now we're going to take it from you. So you can't just commit fraud and then it's like when bankruptcy's over, get away with it. They can come back and get it. What do people do to conceal assets? Oh, just like you would imagine, they take the cash and put it in some other business, right, that looks not related. They may ship inventory off and sell it, and then keep the cash in some other business. Put it in trust, put it in children's names, make payments to fictitious people, just hide the books, not disclose that you're part of some other corporation, some other partnership, some other trust. How would you know if somebody's concealing? Well, there'll be large transfers, right, to insiders, relatives, people like that. Transfers back and forth between bankruptcies, offshore, out to Cayman Islands, places like that. Big expenses that can't be explained. Big fees like a big miscellaneous or a big attorney fee, and then that money's just gone and you don't know what happened to it. Bankruptcy code says that a fraudulent transfer is within 1 year. And they just say, you know what, if you transferred it within a year before you declare bankruptcy, that your intent was to avoid having that. They exclude those from the bankruptcy. I guess they make you give them back. Certainly, there's civil liability for false accusations. You can't just say somebody is committing fraud if you don't have evidence. And as a fraud investigator, you can't just say they're committing fraud. You have to have evidence. And certainly, especially in divorces where people are angry at one another, that can have real backlash because people do lie. They say the other party is bad and doing this bad thing, and they're trying to make them look bad in the divorce, and it's not actually true. So as part of concealment, people have to get that money back in a way they can use it, right? So that's what we would call money laundering. You've basically taken this money from the bankruptcy estate or the divorce estate, so you've kind of stolen some money, but you want to be able to use it, so that is very much money laundering, like we learned about earlier in the semester. So money laundering is obviously, as you know, I'm not going to go into real detail because you already know this stuff, but it's where you take money from one source and clean it up to make it look like it's from a legitimate source. So you would say, this was not part of my bankruptcy. This was not part of my divorce. This is now my new good money from my new business, something like that. As we learned, financial institutions and other organizations report to FinCEN using CTRs and SARs. So anybody who is going to typically receive a big lump of cash, like a bank, an automobile, real estate agents, combios, they have to file these forms with FinCEN that helps catch people money laundering. And maybe people aren't money laundering, but they still have to file them. And we've also already learned about placement, layering, and integration. Placement is where you put it into a legitimate financial institution. You've placed it somewhere that is making it harder to trace. So you deposit that money in the bank, maybe in small amounts, right? So you don't have to fill out the CTR structuring, right? Which is also illegal. Layering is where you transfer it around, send it to the tax haven countries, buy something high dollar, turn around and sell that high dollar thing. Layering. And integration is when you get it back in. It's clean. Oh, this came from my legitimate business, right? You have some high cash business, so you claim it was from that. And then here's a little schematic of how money laundering works. Definitely there's global efforts. We talked all about those earlier in the semester, but there's a lot more of it than there used to be before 9/11. We just kind of thought of it as, well, drug dealers cleaning up money. But now it's become global. It supports terrorism. So everybody really has a lot of statutes and laws to prevent it. And again, we talked about all this stuff previously in the semester. So you know about that. How do you detect it? Well, it's a little tough. So if you go to work at a financial institution, that could, as a fraud investigative type person, an internal auditor type person, it could be part of your job to make sure there's not money laundering. And we talked about that in the semester too, the know your customer, which is the best way to make sure you're not accepting people who will do money laundering. But customers get divorces. Customers, get bankruptcy, and they may start money laundering. They may be a customer and think are great, and they may start money laundering. So, how much you detect them? Well, most people don't purchase expensive assets with cash. That's just not a thing that happens. So if somebody's using currency, and then especially turn around and selling assets for currency, that's a big red flag. Using P.O. boxes instead of home address, owning expensive assets with it. And of course, this is where know your customer comes into play. Like, how does this person have this business? How does this person have these assets? Does it seem like what they own could legitimately come from what they're doing? They say they have a car wash in Kingsville, Texas. Could they possibly make enough money to drive a Ferrari? Right? No, but there's an awful lot of cash coming through there, right? So that's where know your customer comes into play. Just a reminder, money laundering is illegal in and of itself. So that's tied in with other crimes, right? So you could see that a person who's filed bankruptcy or getting a divorce now attempts to conceal assets, and they do money laundering, structuring. Those in themselves have become crimes. So it's better to do things the right way. All right, so that finishes chapter 16.